Welcome to Field Talk, a Montalt Farm Scotland podcast. Join our host, Wallace Curry, as he explores the stories from Montalt Farm networks on how farmers have adapted their businesses with support from specialists and experts to assess farm performance and explore opportunities. Montalt Farm Scotland is farmer-led, farmer-driven, encouraging discussion and solution-based thinking.
Welcome back, everyone, to Field Talk, the Montalt Farm Scotland podcast. If this is the first time coming across it, the first series we did, we went and spoke to all of our Montalt farmers around Scotland, which was great, sort of hearing the stories of people before getting involved with the Montalt Farm and what they're also doing now, which at the time of recording was about 2-ish years into their 4-year stint, just over halfway, what they'd been implementing, what they were looking into. So if you want to go and listen to that side of things, that is the first series. The second series, we've very much more been covering, looking at sort of projects that have been happening through the Montalt Farm project, maybe some tech that's been involved as well, that's been implemented at various farms. And that's where we're going to continue today. We're going to look at grassland management, making your grass work for you. I'm looking forward to hearing about this because I am not an expert in grass, I think it'd be fair to say. So I think there's quite a lot for me to pick up here. We're going to be sort of looking at project findings, the process to establish a way of managing grass production throughout the year, and I guess a lot of the varying factors that come with it, what make it difficult or maybe easy. Maybe both. I'm sure we'll cover a bit of each. And our guest today is John Ritchie. John, would you like to say hello?
Hi, Wallace. How are you getting on?
Very well yourself.
Yeah, good, thanks. Good.
Is it silage time for you at the minute, or are you?
Yeah, we're just the last of the kind of cow silage is getting made. So this is stuff that was kind of grazed late, and just the dry spell, it's we've had to leave it a bit longer to bulk up. But it's okay. We should be there or thereabouts for what we need this year. But yeah, a funny season actually. We got kind of summer in March and April, and then it's kind of been dry and cooler since. But yeah, every year's different, so you just roll with it. I'm afraid that's all you can do.
April was quite something actually. I mean, like sitting, we're sheep primarily at home, sitting lambing time, you're thinking this is bliss, and then you start to get to the stage you're like, needing a wee bit of rain here, team.
I know it's we're never happy. That it's just yeah, it's a difficult one, but it's one of the things I noticed actually at the Highland Show this year when folk came and spoke to you last year after last spring. You know, I'd never seen so many people down because it was such a tough spring. With this year, folk had a far more cheerier disposition. And, you know, the first thing in conversation wasn't the spring, which last year very much was kind of current and still forefront in their thoughts kind of thing, which was nice to see, actually. So, yeah.
Do you know, it was awful last year.
Yeah,
but
there's nothing, you can't sugarcoat it. It was terrible.
But I have to say that with what would I say, sympathy, not reality, because I was 3 weeks in Brazil in March, and then I was 2 weeks in Holland and Switzerland in April. So it was the first lambing I've ever missed, actually. And every
not a bad one to miss.
Yeah, you're right, but there's a hint of guilt that comes with it.
I know. Yeah.
But yeah, no, all good fun. John, for those that don't know, which I'm sure is very few, just give us a wee bit of background about you. Let's forget that we'll come to grassland management and whatnot as we go. I know we'll touch on it here in a bit of background about you, but what's home? Have you always been farming? What's your sort?
Yeah, so very fortunate. I'm fourth generation farmer at Montalt. We're a upland beef and sheep unit, so kind of a mixture of owner-occupier and rented ground and leased ground and lots of different kind of grazing arrangements kind of thing. So about 110 suckler cows and 500 breeding ewes. I've farmed since I was 18. So I actually went to university to do mathematics at Edinburgh, and I lasted 2 weeks and just decided that I'd kind of reached a ceiling in formal education and it wasn't for me, and decided to come home. And I've spoken about this before. I probably had about 10 or 15 years of, you know, I met Alex and very heavily involved on farmers and things like that. But as a farming career, it was almost kind of my wilderness years. I just kind of farmed, you know, I just did what Dad did. And that was, you know, some years were good, some years were bad, and you just kind of rolled with it. And it wasn't really until, I suppose, late 20s, I started kind of more looking at the business side of the things. And, I've been very, very fortunate with Dad's. My succession story has been really, really good. I've kind of known where I stood between myself and my sister and how everything was going to work since I was about 20. So that we've managed that over a number of years, which has made it less painful, I suppose you could say. And more importantly, we're all still speaking, which is a good thing, I always think. So yeah, and then really just started getting involved with grass management. It was always on the radar. It was one of these things that I always kind of seen from afar and just thought, that's not for me. That's that's what dairy guys do, or that's what you do in a really good low ground farm. And then fortuitously, a farm not that far away, I was actually came up for rent, and a guy that a lot of you will know, Michael Blanche, moved in, and then just kind of, you'll hate me saying this, but he was a kind of unofficial mentor for me getting started. And I kind of watched from afar what he was doing, and then got involved with the QMS grazing groups with Alec Brewster at Rockmell. And that's really when it kind of unleashed the potential of what I could see you could do with grass. And, Alec Brewster at Rockmell, and I'll be honest, I take the piss out of him a lot, but he does, as a host and someone who just went and did stuff, whether it worked or not, he just went and did stuff, and being part of that group, that network, was just, it was a game changer for me. Because you were surrounded by positive people, you were surrounded with people that didn't judge when you made mistakes, because we all made mistakes at the start. And actually the legacy of that kind of group, I see it in those businesses, how they've kind of progressed, and not just in agriculture and what they're doing on the farm, but their mindset change and things like that. And it's been an extremely positive experience for me. And, the grassland management bit maybe comes second to actually just having that, a bit wider kind of viewpoint on agriculture and the people in it and things like that, which, so that's a rambly answer.
No, I don't think it is. I think that sort of like open-minded mentality is a good base, whether it's grassland management or learning how to cut hair.
Yeah.
I don't know why that's what I went to. I mean, you and I are
No.
in that side of things, but that it's and then that's the basis to have that, and then you can sort of approach that. And a massive theme that came out of the first series of this podcast was the sort of management groups that surround the Monitor Farm farmers with this openness and being like, you know what, if we make a mistake, we make a mistake. Who cares? Let's use it and work forward, which is it sounds crazy saying that's a progressive mindset, because it should just be what we all do, but we've come into this culture of, oh, you can't get the wrong thing. You can't make this
Yeah.
mistake. So it's how it should be. It's how it should be.
Yeah.
And,
And it builds a fantastic network,
yeah.
and that's a lot of what agriculture, your success is, if you surround yourself with good, positive people, it only helps what you're trying to do, I find. It was a really good guy at a meeting, a consultant did and it sticks with me to this day, is you don't walk away from a negative person, you run. I always thought that was a really
I like that. I like that. And one thing to mention, you mentioned that Michael would hate you saying he was a mentor, which he would absolutely hate. But I know you won't say this, so I'm going to say it. For those that don't know, and this comes at quite an apt time at recording, shout out to Chris Berry, Graham Parks, and a very good friend of mine, and Jock Gibson, who've just been put forward for the Farmers Weekly Grassland Farmer of the Year. And I know John's annoyed that I'm bringing this up, but tell us about that. You've been there before.
Yeah, no, I'm very fortunate to get nominated and to go on and win, which for folk that know me is not my nature at all. To be honest, I struggle with all that kind of stuff. But it was, as an experience to getting judged, it was really positive, because it's one of these things. The judges that came on farm, was Emily Grant and people from the Farmers Weekly, and I've known Emily for quite a few years, and I'll be honest, there is no way I was going to hide anything from her because she knows her stuff. And yeah, it was just, it was one of those experiences I'm very nervous about, but actually when you got into it and you've literally got 3 hours to, you showcase your financials, your business, you showcase where you're going. It's your 3 hours to say, right, this is John Ritchie, this is what we are doing here at Montalt, and yeah, what do you think? And yeah, to get that feedback, and yeah, it was a very positive experience, which I was a bit daunted with to begin with, but I would definitely recommend anyone to go forward and do it. So yeah, and it's been good for me. I've started doing a wee bit more consultancy work on grassland management, and yeah, it's kind of helped. It's not kudos, it's just more just to say, look, this guy maybe knows a wee bit of what he's talking about, and that can be useful going forward. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. I mean, like I very much know that we're going to cover stuff here that you're well qualified to do this podcast, basically. But it does, it's that little stamp, isn't it, that adds to it for whatever reason. So yeah, no, very very well done. But let's start off simple, John. What is grazing management to you? What's the importance of you, and what's the importance of it, and what's your sort of story? You talked about coming into it there through Michael and whatnot with grazing management.
So yeah, I like I said, I seen it from afar, and I did all the kind of research and watched all the YouTube videos and read as much literature. So in my head, to be fair, I was paddock grazing or rotational grazing for a year without even putting up a fence. But actually, what we found is, you got to jump in, and literally that meant for me, after being at the meetings and talking about it for long enough, was we just started off really simple, and it was in the back end, and we had fields after silage that we put lambs on, and so big fields, 20-acre fields, and it was just a case of splitting them in half, an electric fence, rocking the sheep back and forward. And what would usually happen in that before is we would set stock those lambs, we would draw off them, kill them as they're fat, and then we get to the back end and you'd have 60 or 70 acres of pretty bare grass. There wasn't much there. Because we started rocking them back and forward, and then we started splitting fields in maybe into 4, we got to the back end, the lambs went away, and then, there's a bit of grass left. So right, okay, well, we can flush some yows in that grass, and then it starts to snowball. My personality, I'm just like, there's something in this. There's an opportunity here, and what I love about grassland management is you can take your asset of 100 acres and you can turn it into 120 acres without buying any ground, with spending very very little amounts of money on some pretty cheap infrastructure. I'm talking polywire, electric fence posts, and blue alkathene pipe, which is some of the cheapest stuff you'll get in agriculture compared to what we do invest in, and metal and tractors and things like that. So actually, for a really, really small amount of investment, you were getting a massive return. And that, it gets bounded out quite a lot by folk in grazing management. You'll get a third extra farm, and it's not as simple as that. I found that out over the years, but the essence of it is you can take your ground and make it go a lot further, but it needs a bit of knowledge, it needs a bit of experience, and I suppose mostly what I found, it needs confidence. And that's the biggest thing I found with myself and with people I work with, is building that confidence to push the grazing management, grazing platform forward. And unfortunately, my character is very risk averse, so it's taken me probably a lot longer than it'll take a lot of other people. Whereas we're about 7 or 8 years to get into a point where I'm really confident to do stuff. Whereas at the start, I was just, what if it goes wrong? What if it goes that? And that's where I think, likes of the Montalt Farm program and mentorship and all this kind of thing really, really helps, because you've got someone, or you've got a group of people there to ask the questions, who probably already made the mistakes, and slightly hold your hand through the process, which is really positive.
You mentioned about sort of some people say this is a way to sort of increase your land by a third. You said take 100 acres to 120. Is it in that sort of 20 to 30%
Yeah,
ballpark?
this is the bit about grazing management. You can, and we've pretty much done all the practices. So you can go down as simple as splitting a field in half and rocking stock back and forward, maybe rocking them back every 10 days. And that'll give you probably an uplift of 10%, something like that. Okay. We went to the other extreme where we've done things like techno grazing. So that's when you set up fields into kind of lanes and you'll be moving every 24 hours. And in that system, and if you get a wee bit of luck in the right weather, you could increase productivity on set stocking by 35-40%. But it's your time involvement in it is significant. You can end up with quite a lot of individual mobs on the farm, which is great, but it's finding that balance of grazing management that fits in with you, fits in with the family life, fits in how you want to farm. Because you could have 20 mobs grazing postage stamps and utilization would be amazing, the amount of grass you'd be growing. But if you're out at 4 a.m. till 10 at night shifting stock and putting fences up, you're going to get sick of it pretty quick. And I suppose that's maybe what we found at the start, because I didn't invest in infrastructure. That was one of the kind of big things that we found, that we did a whole season, we did a whole year of me taking fences down, putting them up, shifting stock. So you'd start at like 4:30, 5:30 in the morning doing this, and then you had all your other farm work to do. And then we got to the end of the summer season, and I was starting to think, this is a lot of hard work. And actually, the lambs, because we didn't know, I just didn't really know what I was doing. I was farming the grass and not the stock, which is another thing that you can fall into that trap. We did a summer, lots of work. We had grown lots of grass, and we had lots of grass, but the lambs hadn't grown worth a damn. It was probably the worst weaning weights we'd had or we'd known of. And Dad's always pretty good if I want to try something. He's never too hard if it goes wrong. But even at that point, he was kind of like, "Are you sure this is what you want to be doing?" And at that point, I was very, very fortunate. There was a meeting at back end. It was a QMS meeting run by a guy called James Daniels, who's a grazing consultant from down south. He's got a company called Precision Graze, and I don't know, in grazing, you seem to meet these characters that just say wee one-liners to you that really resonates. And he just said to me at this meeting, well, he didn't say it to me, he said it to the whole group when he was speaking about infrastructure and things like that. He says, you can either spend time on something or you can spend money. And that's when it kind of dawned to me, right, we need to go home, stop messing around, shifting fences every day, battery powered electric units, water that's not in the right place. And we just decided, right, we're going to have a winter of where we're going to make a grazing platform. So we've got hot wires everywhere. So each field's got like a mains hot wire around it. We've got a water point or that we can take a drag line off for chalks, and we've got all the subdivisions done before we start. And that was really when we started to up a gear, because we still didn't have all the knowledge and I still didn't have the confidence, but at least we had the infrastructure and we had a platform there that I could play about with it and figure out how to get it going. And then really it's that infrastructure. It's changed slightly, paddock sizes, all this has kind of evolved as the farms evolve. But the main bit is just my confidence is built and how I do it. So yeah, that's.
I watched a really good demonstration from James Daniels, and is his sister Emily? Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, down in Devon just about 3 days ago.
Yeah.
Absolutely
So
brilliant.
he's a great orator, and the way he speaks to farmers is awesome.
And all of that's good. He can be a good salesman, but I was very impressed with what was happening as well. I was very impressed with the demo. I think that's probably an important thing, John. You sort of mentioned this that you can look at this type of system, grazing management in general, whatever we're focusing on, it doesn't matter. And it's so easy to fixate on the high grass summer months. What does you mentioned sort of coming to flushing time and whatnot? What does the rest of the year look like? What's your October to March like?
Yeah, I suppose that's the bit for me where you see the biggest advantage. For me, we speak about having goals set before you enter into grazing management. And one of the goals for us that we kind of figured out is I want to be able to graze earlier in the spring and later in the back end. That's a pretty easy win to not have to feed silage and concentrates and do it off grass. So I suppose the grazing year for us really starts round about October time. So at that point, because the whole farm's kind of split up into kind of roughly 1.3 hectare paddocks, we will be grazing at that point ewes, and we'll still be grazing cattle at that point. But because we're on that paddock system, we actually stop grazing that paddock in the middle of October. And then you move to the next paddock, and because you've got a wedge of grass in front of you, that kind of you finish grazing roughly about New Year time, but you've had grass rested from the middle of October. So the way we try and work it out, as we close up going into the back end and into the winter time, our main kind of goal was to give grass 100 to 120 days rest, and that way the stuff you graze in October and November, it'll grow a little bit. And it'll be nice, good, fresh green leaf. And we don't want to touch that again until the 1st of March. And that's when the ewes go back after scanned, and they go back onto that platform on the 1st of March, use our scanned and lamb with twins and triplets, and they're on day shifts right the way through to lambing time, and then they're set stocked for lambing. And the benefit of that system is, we've not fed any concentrate. I use scan quite high. They were about 195, 200%, they scan. And that grass, we've figured out now that grass, that winter safe grass, and grass that's got energy, it's not depleted because it's been grazed the whole winter, more than meets their nutritional requirements on the lead up to lambing time, which for me is one of the cool things. Snacker feeding ewes and that's gone. I'm not saying if you get really bad weather, we wouldn't have to go back to doing that, but that's been one of the big kind of wins, not just for saving money, but feeding sheep in March when you just drop a wire and shift 250 ewes over a fence and that's them fed. That's cool. I find that it's cool. So
I think I'd have to agree, in fairness. Yeah, I think that's
yeah. But the caveat with that is, and the question I always get asked is, okay, so what do you do with these sheep in the wintertime? Where do these sheep and where do these cattle go? As a saying, you don't just put them in the cow cupboard and bring them back out in April. Kind of thing. Like, so yeah, the wintering's changed. So again, one of the things that we probably didn't concentrate enough is, we really do try and concentrate as much as we can in making high quality silage. So for ewes to work in that system, you need a body condition score of 3 pretty much constantly. You don't want them crashing down. It's very much about trying to keep this level body condition 3. So trying to make as good silage. We're lucky. There's a lot of farmers been up to Montalt and seen the farm, and I would always describe it as we're high and dry. We've got a dry, rocky farm, which allows us to outwinter pretty well. There's caveats to that. If we get a dry summer, we burn up pretty bad. But in the winter time, we've got ground that can carry stock, so which is an advantage, I suppose. So we feed kind of in feedlots for the ewes, so they're on good quality silage. 1 ring feed out of 20 ewes, and that's what we do in a kind of really rocky, dry field. And the cows, they go onto the hill. Because we've changed the way that we graze, we very much concentrate on the good ground as your production during the summer. So everything's on that block, and we leave a lot of the hill to kind of just defer graze. There'll be some dry hogs onto it for a wee bit, and then whereas we used to put production stock on the hill, like using lambs and things like that, which they did okay, but they would never really, you wouldn't be getting fat lambs off of singles or anything off it. So we've kind of decided, right, we defer that grass, and that now gives us a mass of, it's poor quality feed, but for dry cows, after spaining time in November time, we can now block graze them on that hill through roughly, in a good year, we'll get them through to kind of mid-January, on a poorer year up until Christmas time. And then we just buffer feed with silage out of bale and winder. So it's dead simple. It's nothing fancy, but the suckler cow job for us, it's very much just trying to take out as much cost and as much feed as we can out of it to try and make it work. So yeah.
Do you rotate which fields are silage fields year on year, or do you have your silage fields and you have your grazing fields work?
I suppose we were a grass check farmer for 5 years, so we were measuring grass every week with a plate meter, which at the time, there'll be lots of plate meters in sheds that have been bought over the years, and I include myself in this, having a plate meter, and it sits in the shed, and you have all great intentions to go and use it and be one of these cool guys that walks about with harlequin shorts and gumboots and and you can tell him what your grass was. And I very much fitted into that category. So the grass check thing we went into was a major measure grass every week. You know, they wanted the information, and that with 5 years of that kind of record of where the grass is now, and that's found out to be a really powerful bit of kind of information. So we've used that now as a way of just detecting what fields are performing poorest, and we'll switch about between grazing and silage, but then we can also say, right, if it's, you know, if it falls below 7 tonne of dry matter a hectare and it's suitable, that's the fields that will get direct sown into neeps for wintering cows on, or putting in kale or something like that. Again, it's just, before we spent 20 years building sheds to put cows inside, and to be honest, we've spent the last 5 years figuring how to get them back out again. Which you know, last winter pretty much a doddle. The winter before, there was definitely moments where I was like, I was thinking about phoning someone up to put up a big shed, but yeah, that's life. You just need to get through that. So yeah.
This is the Monitor Farm podcast, John, with a focus on that. Why is Monitor Farm as a program carrying this out, and I guess what's your involvement in that been?
So I've been asked to go. So I'm working currently with Bruce up at Buchan and John and David down in Perthshire, and been lucky enough to go down and see Richard down in the southwest. And all three of them have kind of shown an interest, and they can see the benefits of it. And really, I've just come in to see, first of all, to ask the why. You know, why you want to do this, because all three of them are busy. You know, and they've got pretty substantial businesses, and they've got a lot on, and trying to implement this can be tricky to start with. So we're trying to figure out the why. We're trying to figure out how it will fit in with their system. You know, all kind of beef and sheep, and it's just I'm just trying to tailor something that hopefully is going to give them a benefit, not scunner them as well, because you know, it's especially with monitor farmers, there's a lot of information getting thrown at these guys, and they're getting pulled in a lot of directions, and it's just making sure that I can deliver something for them that hopefully it'll see a benefit to their business. And it might be very different from one farm to the next, but I would hate to, for me going in, I just want to make sure that we can find something that's going to work for them and fit in with life and farming and things like that. And for some of them, it might be, they might go down the route of like what we've done here and set up the whole farm in a rotational grazing system. Some might just do a block and because that's what fits. There's lots of variables that we need to ask and figure out on the way. I hate to use this word, but on the journey kind of. So, but yeah, that's what I'm trying to do with the guys, and it's I hope I'm going in and not just saying, right, paddock grazing 101. This is what you need to do. Do this, do that, because there's so much more to that, and the whole what they want out of it kind of thing. Like, so.
I mean, to use your word that you hated, it started with 16-hour days and stuff like that. It's not just oh, perfect, I'm going to get 30% more grass,
Yeah, that's the thing. You hear the tagline, you're going to get given another third of your farm back. And and to be fair, you need these wee things to get you interested. But yes, it's unfortunately not as simple as that.
And what have we had key learnings coming out from the farms through the program? Is there any sort of themes that are coming out, or is there specifics to each farm that you're seeing?
Yeah, well, literally a couple of days ago, I just had a picture from John and David down at Rowiston, the Ayrshire Montalt Farm, and it's just you can see it coming. Oh, we've got too much grass. We've got too much grass. What do we do? And it's a situation that often when you get into rotational grazing, you find, especially if you get into the summer months, you're like, oh my goodness, we've got a lot of grass, which is great. That's fantastic, but also comes with its other challenges, because then, especially with using lambs, are the worst class of stock, and the hardest class of stock. And I'll fight this with any dairy farmer if he wants to argue with me, but they are definitely the hardest class of stock to graze. And you get into midsummer and you get into big, tall covers, lots of kind of stemmy grass and that. And actually, although you've got a lot of grass, it can be a negative too, because lamb performance can drop and things like that. So we were just discussing the other day with John and David what we do, and this is it's a situation I'm in right now, and we are looking at paddocks where you're shifting stock and you're like, covers are too high. So that gives you an opportunity to take some opportunity silage. So you maybe drop out 2 or 3 of the paddocks in front of you, because the way grass is growing just now, your rotation length might only be 17, 16, in young grass it might be only 15 or 12 days in length. So time you're back in and you're back round to take quality, you've got too much grass there, so you're taking that silage out. We do a bit of leader followers, so we'll put ewes and lambs in for 2 days, and then we'll follow them with cows and calves or growing heifers. So ewes and lambs get into a paddock, they get the chance to take the pick, the clover, the leaf. It's kind of set stocking, but on a rotational system. So they're not made to eat that sward down to the residual that you would want. So that their growth rates on that system usually stay pretty good. And the unforeseen thing that I didn't realise of that system is, because you're not making them graze into the worm burden zone, you actually in the summertime you'll drop a wormer, because they're not getting exposed to as much of the larvae. And then the cows and calves come in behind. It's maybe not for everybody's types of cows and calves. You want a cow that's quite robust, and my argument is a suckler cow's got to be a dustbin. She's got to be able to survive on eating the poorer stuff and that, to make her, if she's eating fantastically lush grass all the time, for me, that I'm like, well, there's an opportunity there actually to make more money out of another class of stock. So we use cows and calves and growing heifers as a tidy up mob that will come behind and take that residual down and take out the rougher stuff. But yeah, that's something that we kind of built up in confidence over the last 4 or 5 years. It didn't always go well, but we've kind of figured out all the wee nuances to try and make that system work, which seems to be working at the minute. And again, some graziers might criticise you, but if it all goes wrong, just get the mower out, reset, and then start again. It's not the end of the world. I've done 2 paddocks yesterday, so I still don't get it right. It's just one of these things, But yeah.
I guess it's not the end of the world, but that probably comes into that discussion of confidence again, John, doesn't it? Maybe that's fine for you 7, 8 years in now, but that's a scary thing to do at first. And you're like, well, that's the right thing to do for sure. Folk will be listening to that. What are the challenges and learnings you've found that you've got too much grass? Any negatives?
It's this time of year you can get like you're like, because you're fighting growth. just now you're always really fighting growth because grass is growing, funnily enough, because it's nice and warm, things like that. For folk that's trying to get started, actually it's easier to do it in the back end and in the winter time because you've got what you've got, and at that point all you're really trying to do is eke it out. You're trying to eke that grass out, and you've not got the growth. Grass will still be growing at 10, 15, 30 feet, whatever in the back end, depending on where your farm is. But you've not got that pressure. Whereas just now, you've got a lot of moving parts. You've got using lambs, especially twins, which, they're tricky to graze. You're wanting growth rates. You're wanting ewes to be fit. So that takes a bit of keeping your eye on and that. You've got cows and calves. It's like we've got a mob of 20 heifers, like heifers that calve down at 2, and they're following using lambs just now. And you're like, right, they need to be growing in themselves. They need to be growing a calf, and they're going back to the bull. So you're like, right, how much pressure do I want to put on them? There's a lot of, it's a wrong expression, but it's a bit like opening Pandora's box some days. You're like, all right, okay, I've got all this extra grass and we can keep a bit more stock and we can reduce costs. But there's other bits and pieces that go with it that when I tell the story, I'm trying to say to people, look, these are the mistakes I've made. Please, please, please try and learn from my mistakes, because I've made every mistake in the book, and another book. So try and just listen to what I say when I come to these things, because it's a lot easier to avoid that stuff than actually do it yourself.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's that sort of whole thing, John, about the starting out, whether you're a risk taker, you're risk averse, whatever you are. And I think that's probably quite a good question to ask you. If someone's listening to this and they're thinking, do you know what, I want to do this. I want to do this. I'm looking into it. What's the sort of advice, infrastructure wise, looking at it from the outset, mindset, infrastructure, what's needed? What's got to be considered? What's everything you need to consider before you can jump in and start making mistakes here and there and then building from that?
Yeah. I would definitely, for me, infrastructure is key, because that's that. If you don't enjoy the day-to-day of it, as in, there's batteries going flat all the time, or there's fences not right, there's a water trough not right, those bits, like we didn't have a proper water infrastructure, so we would kind of put fences to burns and ditches, and when I look back, I was just like, no, that was just, you were just giving it was doomed to fail because you weren't thinking about it enough. I would definitely recommend a big mains energizer. The new FFIS grant. That's one of the things that's coming out. That's on the list for grazing management, energizers, that kind of stuff. A big mains energizer with a good earth system, you're talking about $3,000, with a remote control, and that's the remote control is a fantastic thing. So you can just have it in your hand, and you can touch any electric wire on the farm, and it switches the whole system off. So you can move stock, or you can fix something, I think, and that's a big win, if you know what I mean. Water, that's, of all the farms that I go to, that's usually the biggest stumbling block, that getting water to the right place. So, especially if you're starting to using lambs and mobs of sheep, not so critical. Water supplies obviously need water, but it's not as much. If you get hot weather and you've got big mobs of cattle, I've seen mobs of 90 cows and things like that kind of thing. They need a big amount of water that you can deliver quickly. So looking at how you want to do whatever mob size you think you're going to graze, double it, because once you get into it and you kind of think, oh, I could, and this is a mistake I've made. We put in a lot of water pipes that were too small, so we've had to go and redo them because we've changed how we're going to do things. So aim big. Blue pipe, poly wire, all this kind of stuff's dead cheap in the grand scheme of a lot of the things that we do in farming. There's a good farmer says you could actually probably take all your infrastructure, dump it every year and replace it, and you would still have a financial benefit. So yeah, I think in the course of the years we've tallied it up. We've spent about, between water, electricity, subdivisions, we've probably spent about £23,000. But if you take that into the increase in profitability in the business by not having to buy fertilizer and feed, it doesn't take long to pay that stuff back. So yeah.
Do you rotate equipment every year? No.
So a lot of our stuff, all our subdivisions, is just polywire. It's three strands of polywire. We'll have some subdivisions now that's been up for 7 years of 3 strands of polywire. And I'll be brutally honest, those fences probably are lasting longer than wooden fences are just now. And the thing about subdivisions are they are a mental barrier. So the fences, if you have to put up a 3-strand polywire fence just now, good quality polywire and an electric fence post, per metre it's 37 pence. And as long as it's got good electricity going through it, it's this mental barrier. You know, if stock wanted to ram through that, they'll go through it, no bother. But actually, we find that single strand polywire with cows, they respect it. So, you know, we've got cows on a mob of 60 cows on the hill in the wintertime, and the only thing in some bits that stops them from getting down to the village of Dunnan is one polywire. But there's just, I'm going to rue saying that now. I know, but yeah, it becomes a mindset for them, and we've gotten into the way. So when we set up the infrastructure on the farm, there's a lot of folks saying, "Oh, you need to put in gateways and this and that." But there's a guy from New Zealand, Harry Weir, and he set up his system and he trained the stock just across the wires. So, and another thing about confidence, and don't listen to people who are not doing it. Because when I started doing this and I said, "All right, we're going to do this," I was told, "Well, you're going to need a pack of huntways because you're going to be shifting these big mobs of stock and you'll never move them." And I was like, "Oh God, right, what am I doing?" But within 3 days, all we do now is just drop the wires. So if you drop the wires on a 3 strands of polywire, you've automatically got a 60, 80-foot gate wherever you want a 60 or 80-foot gate. And the stock becomes so kind of institutionalized in that system. They know when they see the wires drop, it's time to move. And there's no going round stock chase that they move themselves. And I'll be honest, that's the cool bit about paddock grazing, is that, when you turn stock out in the spring onto really nice grass and they just get their heads down and you hear that noise, well, I get to do that every second day, and that's cool. So yeah, that shift in the stock is pretty simple. I suppose the other good thing about it, you become a better stock person by default, because every beast on your farm runs past you every second day. So you can't really ignore if there's something wrong. You see if there's, lameness issues or something like that. Whereas, you can drive around 300 ewes that spread over 50 acres, and every ewes, most of them are lying, so you don't get to see stuff. So yeah, you're literally seeing every beast on your farm run past you every couple of days, which can prove pretty invaluable when it comes to stockmanship and seeing what's going on.
Well, it's a really important point, because I think the thing that always stuck out to me when robot milking came in, everything was better apart from that one thing of, but I'm not under that cow every day, and twice a day. And it's getting that contact that we've not really had before in this sector is going the other way in the right direction, which is good. One thing you said, John, about sort of your place high and dry. I'm quite certain, I don't know exactly where John and David are, but no in Ayrshire. I'm going to guess they're quite the opposite. In both accounts. What recommendation is there? What sort of advice is there, I guess? Because people will be listening to this from all forms of topography, different farms.
Yeah.
Is there varying advice, or is it relatively similar?
It's relatively similar. It's one of these things that, and I get funny looks if I say this at a meeting. If we get really wet weather, and our farm, it kind of varies between 4 inches of soil above rock to quite horrible peaty stuff that, you know, can have rushes and things like that. So I say we're high and dry. We have got quite a bit of not so nice chucker kind of ground as well. But actually, the frequency of moves and the size of the paddocks when it's wet weather, actually smaller paddocks, quicker moves. So, you know, if we get a lot of wet weather, especially with cattle, if they're going into a hectare and a half, you know, we'll put a single strand up and put them into 3/4 just for the day. Because the visual impact of the mesh you can make in a day compared to if you put them in that same field for 2 weeks, but let them give the whole field, you're actually doing more damage because you're only on that piece of ground for a very small piece of time. And I know that people listening to this think I'm talking absolute rubbish, but that's fair enough. But and I've seen paddocks that when you leave the stock, there's not a blade of grass to be seen. You know, it's black. It is, you know, it's also pertinent to say stock class at the certain times of year that you're going to be doing that. You know, I wouldn't be doing that with ewes with twins when it's really wet. But when you're in the back end and it's, you know, young stock, dry cows or just use, again, it's part of the system. You want stock to be fit. You want stock to be resilient. So I've seen us taking sheep out of paddocks where you can't see a blade of grass because it's so guttered up and black. They move to the next paddock and I've got the pictures on my phone that I show to people. Within 5 days, that paddock's beautifully green again. Because the impact you do is on such a short space of time that you're not really damaging the sward. I think James Daniel speaks about it with like a mob of 400 dairy cows on very wet ground on day shifts or even 12-hour shifts. The worst they've seen is a loss of about 4% of that paddock's grass, you know, that gets actually harmed or destroyed. Where if you took that same amount of mob of cows and just put them in a field, they're going to walk to the water trough. That water trough's not going to shift. So actually, you'll do more damage. And if you get to a point you do that much damage, it's a lot easier to go and fix half a hectare than it is to go and fix the whole field. So it's how you want to look at it. You know, when you get wet weather, you're always going to cause damage. And I know we're speaking of a farm that maybe gets, 45 inches of rain a year, where I know when you go west, you're talking 70, 80, 90. And it's trying to make a system that will fit your farm. Because there's no point in me saying in the east that, you know, you can do this in like wet bits, really wet bits, doing Argyllshire and things like that. But there's always something you can glean from a system. There's always something that you can take and say, right, no, we maybe can't do what John's doing, but there's a bit of that we can involve. We could do it in the spring or we can do it at that. It's very difficult not to make it totally prescriptive to every farm. But that's really when it comes, the farmer needs to decide what parts of the system they want to put in place on their farm.
And you've mentioned the number of stock in a mob, which is probably the other thing that my head jumps to a lot when we talk about this type of thing, John. How are you working out stocking rates? Is it purely looking at through grass measuring how much dry matter's there and how much that can hold, or is there more to it than that?
Yeah, you start to get that there is, and you know, this is genuinely, there's a really good resource that QMS have got at the Grazing calculator, so that you can input into that size, weight of the stock, what the dry matter demand is. You know, it'll give you recommendations, and then it really just works out the rotation for you. You know, how many paddocks you're going to need, how much dry matter demand is. What we found is you kind of, once you start to know, early spring, often you'll be chasing grass. You'll always be thinking, I've not got quite enough grass, which actually usually means you've got it probably about spot on. Because as the spring progresses, grass growth, you know, always increases. Well, hopefully the sun always shines and it always increases. And then as you always get to this point, you've always got a surplus. But that's a bit, I suppose, it comes with confidence. The other thing about mob size is usually it's dictated with what your handling facilities are. So I've seen mobs of twins of 400 used with twins in a mob, with a very big handling system. There is a bit of chat that we're using lambs with twins 250. You might start to see individual performance drop once you go over the 250. But a lot of those things that dictate that is like, it seems totally silly to say, but gate size. So it's one of the things we've noticed and learned over the years that if you have a big mob of using lambs and you're shifting them over the electric fences and you make a gate that's maybe 60 feet wide, you know, because you've dropped that much the distance between the posts, the using lambs go over, and within about 3 or 4 minutes, it goes quiet. If you take 250 using lambs and put them through a 12-foot gate, that pressure point, you know, you've got far more mismothering, you've got far more pressure using lambs going away from the things. Once they go through that 12-foot gate and into the paddock next door, it might be 2 hours before the noise dulls down. So it's all these wee bits and pieces that, yeah, until you're doing it, you don't realise the impact that you're having. Cows and calves I'll be honest, cows and calves are a totally different kind of thing, because usually the cows are off, you know, they're just interested in grass. They're not really worried about the calves. And, you know, young stock, you know, yearlings, that kind of stuff, they're the dead easy ones to graze. Because, you know, if you're in a cattle system, single wire, yeah, you know, cattle are good fun to graze because they're really resilient. They've got that big wide mouth. They give you really good residuals. Sheep are tricky, you know, at certain times of year. Sheep are tricky in general, but yeah, the paddock grazing stuff, that they can be tricky as well.
I reckon I could sit here, John, and I'm sure there's people that understand grass more listening that would be shouting questions at me to ask you, but it's fascinating to hear because it's something that you hear about through uni. You know, I come from a relatively extensive farm. I think we have one cut of about 13 hectares, and
Yeah.
that still hasn't happened yet. You know, that'll happen through July time. And it's interesting, and you think about it, and I'm not on the farm, so I'm not looking at implementing anymore. But it's every time you hear about it, you hear all the buzzwords, the fun stuff, the stuff James is saying because he's got to sell a product, and that's fine, and it's important. But it's so valuable to hear the reality of it, and that there is challenges. Of course, there's challenges, but then hearing those little things, like you're saying there about depending on gate size, like you never think of that if you're not doing it. Well, I wouldn't. I don't imagine many would. Maybe there's better thinkers than me, but it's good to hear. For people listening though, I'm sure I've gained a lot from this, but where would you direct people to sort of look into this a bit further if you were to signpost them somewhere?
I would. What's helped me and I found invaluable over the years is not trying to do this on your own. So if you know, the Montalt Farms, and you know, I know we're here speaking about Montalt Farms, but that community within the Montalt Farms that are trying this as well. You know, if you're thinking of trying it, there's a lot of the Montalt Farms are trying it. So go along, see what they're doing, see what you can glean from it. QMS, the grazing calculator, is a fantastic resource, just for actually sitting down and doing the nitty gritty, you know, working out daily demand, dry matter demand, paddock size, all that kind of stuff. As a real cool bit of kit. AHDB, they've got really good resources on grazing infrastructure. They've got you know, technical notes on how you set it up, what things to do in the winter time. You know, often the paddock grazing or the rotational grazing is just one bit of the farming system that evolves, but actually because of that, so many other bits of the farming of how you farm might evolve as well. You know, how you outwinter or how you do the winter will change. How many stock classes, you know, there's lots of wee bits and pieces that, you know, the paddock grazing seems to have a knock-on effect to later down the line. And another good one, Chuggas, the Irish kind of equivalent of QMS, they've got some fantastic resources on grassland management, technical notes. You know, there's lots of good stuff. You know, YouTube, heaps. There's lots of stuff out there. All I would say is, if you're getting advice, go and get advice from people who are doing it, because there's a lot of folk in our industry that love to talk it down. And if you ask them what went wrong for them when they tried it, I've not tried it, but
yeah, they're not normally the person to listen to. Do you know, I'll end it on an embarrassing note for myself. I was about 26, had been lecturing 3 years before I realised chuggas and what I thought was tea gas was the same thing.
Well, to be honest, Wallace, I still don't know if it's gas or chuggas, but I heard an Irish guy say chuggas, but which might be derogatory. I don't know.
Well, no, what you've just said is exactly how I found it. My boss, you might know him at the time, John Flanagan, just said, "Oh, what about chuggas?" and gave me the link, and I was like, "You're joking." I did not realise they were the same thing. I've spoke about chuggas and I've referred to tea gas in front of me. So
yeah. No, I've done exactly the same.
Here, John, thank you. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate your time. It's been really interesting.
No worries. Cheers, Wallace.
Thank you very much. And for those of you listening, that's been John Ritchie speaking Grassland Management and trying to sort of get as much out of your grass as you can, and also working for you as well, not just across the board. Upcoming episodes in the series, we've got nutrition and pneumonia planning, not nutrition pneumonia planning. We've got a QMS AHDB baselining project. We've got identifying profitability markers in cattle and more. If you've got things that you'd quite like to see that you know are happening in the Monitor Farm scene, you'd like us to talk about, to get in touch. But as ever, thank you very much for listening. This has been Field Talk, the Monitor Farm podcast. See you for the next one.
Thanks for tuning in to the Monitor Farm Scotland podcast. Don't forget to click subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from for more episodes as we continue to dive into the stories from our Monitor Farms. If you want to stay updated with our latest news and events, please visit the Montalt Farm Scotland website and follow us on social media for more updates and keep in the know about what our farms are getting up to. Montalt Farm Scotland is funded by Scottish Government and managed by Quality Meat Scotland and AHDB.